How are you changing your strategy, if anything, for this election cycle? It was such a close race last year. So what did you learn in 2022, and what changes are you making in this campaign?
Yeah, we learned a lot. Biggest lesson was that we need to have Republican unity. We had a very divided primary in 2022, and unfortunately we didn't have enough time to really bring the Republican Party together. That hasn't been an issue since I kicked the campaign back off in January of 23. I've been endorsed by all the different county level GOPs, got through my primary, was fortunate enough to have a primary opponent who immediately endorsed me and is supporting me currently. So we have a very unified Republican Party.
One of those big issues this time around in this election cycle is the economy.
Yeah.
What policies would you push for if elected to Congress to, lower the cost of housing, groceries, energy? Those are energy, gas prices, obviously. Big issues on voters' minds. What's something you would want to push for specifically?
Yeah, that's definitely the top issue. When I get out and I talk to people, and especially in my small community, people who were doing just fine a couple years ago are now really struggling to fill up a tank of gas, to be able to afford groceries. And this out of control inflation is being driven by spending in Washington, D.C. In Marie Perez's short time in Congress, she's approved $4 trillion in new inflationary spending. So this is spending more money than the federal government actually brings in tax revenue. So this is all inflationary spending. So first and foremost, what Congress has to do is get the spending under control and only spend what we take in federal tax revenue. So I think it's absolutely essential that Congress puts a strict cap on spending, and we only spend what we take in tax revenue. That's what's driving the out of control inflation. So Washington, D.C. is stopping this practice of money printing that my opponent has fully supported. I think that's job number one. Number two is energy. We have to get back to being energy independent. I know there's a bunch of studies and stuff coming out of Washington, D.C. that say, oh no, we are energy independent, but go look at the price of the pump.
What would you say then to people who might hear your perspective and look at something like the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed in Congress within the last several years? That was something that the government invested in improving American infrastructure. Would you classify that as erroneous spending?
I'm sure there's some good parts of it, but the inflationary spending that was done under the name of infrastructure, where are the infrastructure improvements that you can point to in Washington's 3rd District? We have a bridge that needs to be We have one that needs to be repaired, and we have another bridge that needs to be built because of the traffic and congestion problems that we have in Portland and Vancouver. Yet Washington, D.C. has made some bills called infrastructure. It's just like the Inflation Reduction Act. We did the Inflation Reduction Act, and how much did that actually reduce inflation? It simply didn't. So there's been a lot of corporate special interests that have gotten paid through these different inflationary bills that the Biden administration has passed. But at the end of the day, inflation remains high. The jobs are still getting shipped overseas. We have D.C. bureaucrats controlling our natural resources industries. We have a war on U.S. domestic energy, so it's harder to fill up the tank, and that drives the price at the grocery store and of all other goods. So I would say that the current Biden, Harris, and Perez economic policies have completely and totally failed the people of the district.
Shifting to immigration and border security, what needs to be done in regards to this issue in the next Congress? If you're elected, what policies would you push for? Because this is going to be a big issue that the next Congress will have to tackle.
It's a huge issue. I mean, just recently here, we had a young toddler in Vancouver who was killed by a fentanyl overdose because the toddler got their hands tragically on some fentanyl their parents had and died. And pretty much everywhere I go in the district, I have people come up and tell me their personal experience of losing a loved one from fentanyl. Now, I've done ride-alongs with the Clark County Sheriffs, Lewis County Sheriffs. I've talked to the task force that handles the I-5 corridor between Portland and Seattle, and they all tell me the same thing. The fentanyl is coming from the wide open southern border, and it's killing people here in the district. So we've got to actually shut down the border by getting more resources down there for law enforcement, get the military down there if we need to. To stop the flow of fentanyl, we need to actually construct a border wall. I've been down to the border twice. I've been down to the San Diego crossing, which is the mouth of the I-5 corridor where most of the fentanyl comes in. We simply need to make it very clear that there's no pathway to American citizenship if you come to our nation illegally. We have to cut off all the different avenues that these illegal immigrants are getting to finance themselves here. So everything that the DHS is providing them, the federal government is providing them, state governments are providing them. And then we've got to enforce mandatory E-Verify to make sure that we're cracking down on the employers that are hiring the illegals. Because not only are the illegal immigrants taxing the system, basically by putting more demand on local resources that they don't pay into. They're also driving down the wages of the working class because illegals will work for less than American citizens.
So then what would you push for in regards to the asylum process to make changes? You know, you're very clear on, you know, securing the border and what you want to do there, but in regards, you know, to the asylum process, what would you want to see changed?
So we need to restore the policies that were in place under the Trump administration and actually under the Obama administration as well. We typically did not let people come directly into our country without being vetted in a third country first, right? So this is typically called Remain in Mexico, but a lot of people who are coming from China, from the Middle East, they need to go to the first safe third country, go to the US consulate or embassy and claim asylum there. They're vetted in that country and then they come to our nation if they pass vetting.
I want to turn now to broader foreign policy. There's no telling what the conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine will look like when the next Congress is sworn in. So if you are elected, where would you stand on continued military aid to Israel and Ukraine in the next Congress?
So first and foremost, we have real problems here in our district. You know, as a veteran, as somebody who fought for over 20 years, did 11 combat deployments, lost countless friends overseas, lost my late wife overseas, nothing pains me more than coming back to our country and seeing Americans living on the street, just seeing Americans addicted to drugs, not being prioritized by their government, by the country that we all fought for. So we, first and foremost, have to take care of our citizens, and that's not happening right now. Before we worry about the borders of other countries, we have to worry about our border first and foremost. That has to be our top priority. Also, look, we have to be realistic. 36 trillion in debt, adding a new trillion every 100 days or so. There's a lot that we can do as it pertains to supporting Israel and their fight against Hamas and Hezbollah that isn't going to cost us tons of money. First and foremost, we can cut off all the funding that's going to Iran. October 7th never would have happened had Biden and Harris not given Iran access to billions of dollars that Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis then used to ignite this current war. Biden still hasn't cut off that money. He in particular hasn't cut off the money that goes to the government of Iraq. The government of Iraq is controlled by Iran. We completely and totally messed that entire place up. It's controlled by Iran now. They're still able to essentially launder money through Iraq, and a lot of our foreign aid ends up in the hands of these militias. So by simply cutting off a lot of that funding, getting back to the maximum pressure sanctions, we can cut off Iran from being able to basically resupply these groups that are now on their heels because of the military operations that Israel has taken. So for a very low price, we can come in and provide some very serious diplomatic cover. Look, for the last 2.5 years now, we have basically been executing a strategy where we give Ukraine billions and billions of dollars and military aid. I've been against that since day one. However, we've been trying that now for almost 2.5 years, and just look at the results. A generation of young Ukrainian men are dead. We have Russia that now controls more territory inside Ukraine than they did at the beginning of the war. The goal in Ukraine needs to be to stop the killing. We don't do that by continuing to fund the war. We do that by ensuring we get both sides to the negotiating table. Again, this is a place where I think Trump is uniquely postured to come in and lead a peace there. Congress needs to be able to step up and to support him in that effort.
I want to turn now to one more big issue in this campaign, and it's abortion rights. Critics and your opponent have called you an extremist on the issue, saying that you support a nationwide abortion ban. Where do you stand on the issue right now, and what's your response to those comments?
Look, I support the Supreme Court, took an oath to support and defend the Constitution. I believe in our system. I fought for it for over 20 years. I personally am pro-life. The Supreme Court voted to put the decision, the very, very divisive decision about abortion, back at the state level. Abortion is legal in Washington state up to about the 10th week. I believe, or maybe even longer, but abortion's not on the ballot in Washington state. So I do not support a nationwide abortion ban. I support Roe being overturned and being pushed back to the state level. I support IVF, I support contraception. So the whole divisive issue of abortion, it's back at the state level now. What I want to focus on from the federal level is lowering the costs associated with childbirth, with raising kids, expanding the child tax credit deduction for working families, making items like baby formula and diapers, making those tax-free. Those are real concrete things that we can do for working families from Washington, D.C. But as for the abortion issue, it's back at the state level. I don't support an abortion ban.
Thank you for your time, Joe.
Thank you. Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Can you guys just stay